Tuition fees are going up and student debt can be scary, but don't panic because I'm going to break down all the important things that you need to know about student finance this year. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. It's Tom here again from Save the Student, and in this video, I'm going to be explaining everything you need to know about student finance in 2025-26. This includes how big a student loan you'll get, what the repayments might be like, how to apply for student finance, plus any other funding that you might be able to get. But very quickly, before we get into it, make sure to like and subscribe so you never miss another video. Okay, so it probably makes sense to start by explaining what funding is on offer, and no matter where you're from in the UK, there will be money to help fund your tuition fees and your living costs, and I'll explain those in a little bit more detail later on. Exactly how much you'll get, what the repayments are like, and who you apply to, all of those things will vary depending on a few factors, which again, I'll go into in a bit more detail later on. But the big one to know about right now is where you live in the UK. So each part of the UK has its own student finance body. So you've got Student Finance England, Student Finance Northern Ireland, Student Awards Agency Scotland, and obviously Student Finance Wales as well. And crucially, just to really hammer the point home, you apply to the student finance body in the part of the UK where you normally live, not where your university is based. So let's say that you normally live in Wales, but you're going to be studying at the University of Manchester, you would apply to Student Finance Wales and not Student Finance England. I should say as well that even though most students in the UK will be eligible for some funding, there are some eligibility criteria that might mean you get less or potentially even no funding at all. For the full lowdown, obviously check out our guide that I've linked to in the description below, but as a very quick summary, your eligibility will be affected by your course, your uni, your age, and probably most importantly, your nationality and residency status. So again, go to our guide for the full details, but in short, you usually need to have been a UK citizen or have what's known as settled status for at least 3 years, although there are some exceptions made for other groups like refugees. However, what I would say is don't worry too much about all of this because the vast majority of courses at the vast majority of universities will be eligible for student finance funding. So as long as you meet those requirements on living in the UK, you should be eligible to get some cash from student finance. So there are actually two parts to your student loan, and the first part is your tuition fee loan, which, as the name suggests, will cover the cost of your tuition at university. And even though tuition fees are going up this year in some parts of the UK, and honestly, do not even get me started on that, but if you are eligible for funding, then you won't have to pay a single penny of your tuition fees upfront, either because they're covered in full by a loan or because tuition fees are already free where you're from. So if you're from England or Wales, the maximum tuition fees this year will be that new higher amount of £9,535, no matter where you study in the UK, and your student finance body will cover that in full with a loan. And I say maximum fees, but in reality, most courses will charge this new higher amount. If you're from Northern Ireland, your fees will be up to £9,535 unless you stay in Northern Ireland, in which case they're capped at £4,855. And if you're from Scotland, again, you will be paying up to £9,535, or rather that will be covered by a loan, unless you stay in Scotland, in which case your fees will be completely free. And just to say, because this money is for your tuition fees, student finance will pay the money directly to your university. So it will never be in your bank account, you'll never see the money, you don't have to worry about making that payment yourself. So that's tuition fees, but the other part of your student loan is the maintenance loan and possibly a maintenance grant too. And there is way more variation here in terms of what you might get. So again, as long as you meet the eligibility criteria, you should be able to get at least some cash, but exactly how much you get will depend on a few factors, including what your household income is, where you'll be living when you're studying, and again, which student finance body you're applying to. And unfortunately, even if you get the maximum amount on offer, quite often that's still not enough to live on. And for me, that is one of the worst things about student finance that needs to change. And what that means is you'll have to find extra cash from other sources to make ends meet. And again, that is something I'll cover in a bit more detail later on. But anyway, no matter who you are or where you're from, there are some basic rules that do apply across the board. So firstly, when we talk about household income, that is usually the income of the parents or the guardians that you live with outside of term time. And the reason I say live with is because if you don't live with one or both of them, then their income will not be included. But on the flip side of that, if you have a step parent or a guardian living with you, then their income will be included no matter how unfair you or they might think that is. Anyway, this amount will be used to decide what maintenance funding you get. So in most of the UK, if your household income is higher, then you'll get a smaller loan. And if your household income is lower, then you'll get a bigger loan. Now it is slightly different if you're applying to Student Finance Wales, but I'll explain that in a bit more detail later on. But if you do end up getting a loan that's smaller than the maximum amount, that's because the government expects your parents or guardians to make up the shortfall between your loan and that maximum amount. And if you want to know exactly how much that is, we have a parental contributions calculator on the site that will tell you in just a few seconds. And just to say that if you don't live with your parents or guardians, so maybe you're a mature student, maybe you're a care leaver, maybe you're estranged from them, whatever it is, other measures can and will be used, and we do cover those in more detail on our site. The second thing to note is that no matter what your household income is, there is still a minimum amount that all students will be eligible for, and that's what you'll get if your household income is above the maximum threshold, or if you don't give student finance the evidence they ask for to prove your household income is actually what you say it is. And the final thing to note is that what we'll be covering here is actually what's on offer to full-time non-final year students. So if you're in your final year, the final installment that you get is slightly smaller because the third semester is a bit shorter. And if you're a part-time student, then the amounts on offer are completely different, and we cover them in more detail in this guide, which we've linked to below. So with all of that sorted, here is a quick rundown of what you could be entitled to depending on which student finance body you're applying to. And just to save you watching stuff that is completely irrelevant to you, I'm going to add some timestamps so you can go to the bit that you're interested in and then just skip to the next section. So in England, annoyingly, there are no grants as part of the main maintenance package, which means all of your maintenance funding comes as a loan, which then gets added to your student debt. So you can see now the amount you receive will vary depending not only on your household income, but also on where you'll be living while you're studying. And you'll see there are those maximum and minimum amounts based on the maximum and minimum household income threshold. So the minimum household income threshold is £25,000 a year, and that will get you the maximum loan no matter where you'll be living. And then if your household income is above the specific threshold for where you'll be living, you'll get the minimum amount. And just a heads up that everything in between is on a kind of sliding scale. So although we have listed some exact amounts here, the amount that you get will be decided by your exact household income. So let's say that your household income is £33,000 a year. You'd probably get something in between the amounts that are listed here for 30 and 35,000. If you're from Northern Ireland, then the government offers both loans and grants to help cover your living costs. So if you're lucky enough to get a grant, then that doesn't have to be repaid, but any loans that you get will be added to your student debt. As I've already kind of explained, the amount you get is affected by two things: where you'll be living while you're studying and what your household income is. But you'll see here that your household income also affects how much of your funding comes as a grant. So if you're from a lower income background, you'll get more funding overall and a bigger percentage of it comes as a grant. And then as your household income goes up, the overall level of funding goes down, and also you get a smaller percentage of it as a grant. But as I say, it also varies depending on where you'll be living whilst you're studying. So although we've just been looking so far at the amounts that you'll get if you'll be living at home, I'll quickly show you now the amounts you'll get if you'll be living away from home and if you'll be living away from home and in London. And it's also worth saying that with all of these tables, the amount that you get will be decided by your exact household income. So we've just put these here as example amounts, but if your household income is, let's say, £33,000 a year, you'd get something in between the amounts that we've listed here for 30 and 35,000. In Scotland, both loans and bursaries are part of the standard maintenance package. So you have the loan, which gets added to your student debt, and then the bursary, which is just a gift that you do not have to repay. Now, I mentioned earlier that where you're living whilst you're studying might have an impact on how much money you receive, but actually that isn't true if you're from Scotland. So the Student Awards Agency Scotland just has a few set amounts that it pays out no matter where your university is, no matter where you'll be living. And another big difference to the rest of the UK is that whereas elsewhere the amount you receive is based on your exact household income, in Scotland the amounts are decided in just 4 bands. So it literally is as simple as if your household income is in one band, that is the exact amount that you'll be getting. So let's say your household income is £27,000 a year. That means you're in the £24,000 to £33,999 band. So you'll be getting £9,400 of loan, £500 of bursary. Simple as that. In Wales, the government offers all students a mix of loans and grants. So there's a loan that gets added to your student debt and the grant that doesn't have to be repaid. In terms of how household income will affect how much you get, in Wales, it does work a little bit differently to the rest of the UK, but it is definitely to your advantage. Because although elsewhere in the UK, extra household income means you get less loan, in Wales, it just changes the split of what you get between loan and grant. The overall amount at the end is still exactly the same. Now, don't get me wrong, I do understand that might be a little bit confusing. So what this actually means, if you look at these tables, is that all students with the same living circumstances will receive the same amount of money no matter what their household income is. The only difference is what the split is between the loan and the grant. So just as an example, you can see here on this table, this is what it looks like for students who will be living at home while studying. And you can see that no matter what your household income is, you'll be getting £10,480. It's just that students from poorer backgrounds will get more of it as a grant that they then don't have to repay. And the same is true for the other two living circumstances too. So if you'll be living away from home and outside London, you'll get £12,345. And if you'll be living away from home and in London, you'll get £15,415. Again, with the split of the loan and the grant, the only thing that's affected by your household income. So that's your main maintenance package sorted. But obviously I did mention earlier that it's often not enough to cover your living costs in full. So you'll want to look at other ways to top your loan up. But the good news is that there are at least a few options out there. So again, it does vary quite a bit from country to country, but no matter where you're from, there will be some extra bursaries and grants that you can apply for as part of your student finance package. Now, I won't go through them them all because honestly, again, we would be here for hours, but there are a fair few out there that you can look at, including the special support grant, which is if you're on housing or income support, travel grants, which are there if you need to travel abroad or maybe to a clinical placement as part of your course. There are disabled students allowances as well, also known as DSA, and they're there if you're a student who has a physical or mental condition that impacts your ability to study, and childcare and dependence grants too if you're financially responsible for a child or an adult. As I say though, that is not a complete list of the funding that is available, nor have I actually been super detailed about any of them, so definitely check out this guide that we've linked to below, which goes through all of it in way more detail. And also bear in mind that as well as all of this cash that's on offer from Student Finance, there are still loads of bursaries, grants and scholarships on offer from other organisations, so we're talking charities, businesses, and obviously your university too. Now you could get this money for all kinds of reasons, but annoyingly there isn't one easy way to find them all. But the good news though is that our bursary sources guide does do a pretty good job of listing almost all of the places where you might be able to find that cash. So do check it out where we've linked to it below, because even an hour or two of searching could end up with you getting an extra few hundred or maybe a few £1,000s of additional funding. So no matter where you're from in the UK, you should be able to apply for your student finance online. And don't worry if you don't think you're going to get the grades to go to your first choice university, because you can still apply for student finance now, and then if you do change your uni later on, you can change your student finance application too. In fact, not only can you apply for student finance before you know what university you're going to, you actively should be doing that, because if you don't apply for student finance before the deadline, there is a chance that you won't get your first payment in time for the start of the uni year. So again, just like everything, the deadlines do vary across the UK, and also depending on whether or not you're a new student. So if you're from England, it's the 16th of May 2025 for new students and the 20th of June for returning students. If you're from Northern Ireland, it's the 30th of April for new students and the 30th of June for returning students. In Scotland, it's just one date, the 30th of June 2025, no matter if you're a new or returning student. And in Wales, as I'm filming this video, annoyingly, they haven't announced a deadline yet, but hopefully I've been able to list it here in the editing stage. And if not, do check out our applying guide, which will update as soon as we hear anything more. As I say, you can do it all online, but you will need to have a few documents to hand, like an in-date passport and some info about your household income. But again, for loads more detail on this, do check out our guide to applying for student finance, which, like I said, we have linked to below. So now you know how to apply, you know roughly how much you might be getting. You might be wondering about student loan repayments, and once again, it is an area where it varies massively depending on where you are in the UK. So again, I won't go into too much detail, but I will run through the main central points, which fortunately are the same across the board. So first off, no matter where you're from, you won't start repaying your student loan until you reach the 1st April after you've graduated. And even then, you need to be earning above a specific threshold, although that exact number does vary depending on when you started university and which part of the UK you're from. Then, once you're earning above the threshold, you repay 9% of whatever you earn above it. So let's say you're earning £35,000 a year and you're on the Plan 5 repayment plan, which currently has a £25,000 repayment threshold. You're earning £10,000 above the threshold, and that's the only part of your salary that you have to make repayments on. And obviously, you only repay 9% of that chunk anyway, which works out to £900 a year or £75 per month. Not nothing, but maybe a little bit more manageable than you might have expected. Another important thing to note, and this is something that people always get wrong, is that the size of your debt has absolutely zero impact on the amount you repay each month, because that is only affected by your salary. So let's carry on with this same example, and let's say you owe 50k, which is roughly the average debt a student graduates with in the UK. The fact that you owe 50k doesn't change the fact that you're only repaying 9% of the £10,000 you earn over the threshold, so £900 per year. And it's the same if you owed 5k, so you'd still be repaying 9% of the 10k you owe over the threshold, so £900 per year. And to take an extreme example, let's say you owed 500 grand. You're still only repaying that same 9% of the £10,000 you earn over the threshold, so again, £900 per year. And part of the reason that works is because there's actually no obligation to repay the loan in full. So if you don't totally clear the balance of your loan by the end of the repayment window, which is usually 30 or 40 years, depending on the type of loan that you have, then whatever amount is left is completely wiped, no matter how much or how little you have repaid. Now, I don't want to downplay the cost of going to university, and we do actually have a video on the channel discussing if uni is worth it. But the important thing is not to be distracted or scared by the headline figure of whatever your student loan debt is. Because really, for a lot, and maybe even most people, it will just work out as a relatively small extra tax that you have to pay for the rest of your working life, and not a debt that you absolutely have to repay as you would do with other more traditional types of loan. Anyway, like I say, there are a few specific differences with what the repayment threshold is, how long you repay for, what the interest rate is. So to find out what plan you'll be on, and obviously all the details that go along with it, just check out our guide that we've linked to below. And that's pretty much it in terms of what you need to know about student finance in 2025. 2025-26, and hopefully it has saved you a few panicked Googles at 2 a.m. If you have found it helpful, please do drop a like so YouTube knows to recommend it to other students looking for advice, and make sure to hit that subscribe button too, because I have got loads more money saving hacks coming your way.